This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into a holiday edition of the Still Enrolled podcast. Ryan Hickey, Brian Tripp with you here. As Tripp, we got a lot to hit on here. The playoff is still, at least the quarterfinals, still a week away, but a lot to still break down. An early look we'll give you at the two big games the Big Ten is in. We also have some transfer news we'll dive into. We got plenty of non-playoff bowl games as well. We'll give you predictions for and trying to tell you who's in and who's out of those games here as well. We called it a holiday edition. We tried our best. So I'm going to apologize to the audience first and foremost here. We try to get Santa Claus, a little busy. Try to get Mensch on a bench, also busy as well. So for this holiday edition of Still Enrolled, you're stuck with Tripp and I.
I was hoping we could get Buddy the Elf. That was my number one target for the podcast.
You know what? That's a good. I dropped the ball. I didn't think of him. That's a good ball. And
Did you have a great
Buddy
Christmas?
The Elf's dad right now.
Oh yeah.
Sitting in
Did
that
you have a Merry
chair. You look.
Christmas?
I did.
Yeah.
I did not get cold, thankfully. So Santa treated me well.
Same. Even though that was your prediction, your bold prediction did not come true.
What a shock! You ready for this? A prediction of mine incorrect.
And for our YouTube audience, they can tell we're still recording from home, right? You're still in New York right now?
That's right, in my childhood bedroom. I mean, I guess you can't see, but there's some snow on the ground. You were telling me before we started this pod, you're out there shoveling yourself.
Yeah.
So look, just like we're back at home kids again, doing work. Look at that.
Yeah. Well, I need to get the snow thrasher out to go down the hill in the backyard.
Oh, yeah. See, that's the only thing about Long Island. It's too flat. Like there's a few hills, but it's like a 2-second hill, then you're done. I'm sure it sounds like you got a nice hill. I'm jealous. I am jealous. All right, so we got a lot of holiday stuff to get into, but also we got some playoff stuff to get into. Tripp, we're just about a week away from two big matchups: Penn State, Boise State, Oregon, Ohio State as well. We talked to this a few weeks ago, and it's interesting because I think when you look at the advantages of winning your conference and getting a bye, right, the biggest thing is health. In the case of Notre Dame, they lost a key defensive lineman now out for the rest of the playoffs. So, right, we talked about rest is key, and making sure you guys are healthy as possible for these big games are key. But also now you look, Tripp, it's going to be for Oregon 25 days from the Big Ten title game to their game now in the Rose Bowl, January 1st. And you look at some of the Vegas odds. Now, it gets some of it, right? Boise State, Arizona State messes that up. But 3 of the 4 teams with byes, including Oregon, are underdogs. Is it possible? Are you kind of looking now that we're actually here, Tripp? Could this bye still be a benefit to Oregon? Or is it maybe a little bit more of a hindrance than we thought now that we're kind of seeing this play out here in front of us?
I think it depends on the team. I think it depends on the situation. And I think we're going to have to learn as this first year of the college football playoff goes by, what kind of effect will it have with these teams? We just don't know yet. That was the unique beauty of this 12-team playoff is you haven't experienced it before. We haven't seen it before. I'll still say this. I think the number one issue, and it's such a shame, right? And I was reading a lot of stories about this over the last 24, 48 hours, especially since we talked on Monday, that it felt like this initial week of college football's 12-team playoff, dating back to probably last Friday in the Indiana-Notre Dame game. What really should be a celebration of college football has been such a fine-tooth examination of what is wrong with college football and what is wrong with the 12-team playoff. Instead of celebrating outstanding performances by Texas, Ohio State, Penn State, and Notre Dame, and instead of celebrating, which is still an outstanding season for the likes of an SMU, the likes of an Indiana, Clemson, every team that played in that opening round, instead, we just wanted to point out all the flaws of this 12-team playoff and all the flaws of college football, which I think is a way that the sport has always had and always been somewhat traditionally. But I think we're still trying to figure out, well, what is the right formula here for rust versus rest, right? And I'll still stand by that playing a fewer amount of games and only having to win 3 instead of 4 to win a national championship still's a plus. And I think when you're in a season, these are players who typically play high school, and they've in college in the past, right? For this first time, they've played 13, 14 game seasons. To now ask a team to play a 16, 17 game season and still navigate, and staffs, right? Navigating all those things that we've talked about, portal, recruiting. I think having the rest in the bye is still a benefit. Now, if we go into this week and all the teams that didn't have rest win, okay, maybe it's a little bit of a different story, right? But I still think having the rest the ability to not have players get hurt, preparation time, and really, I think it's still a benefit for these teams.
It's gonna be interesting, like you said. Like I think that's where really Dan Lanning
Mhm.
is gonna earn his money here because it is tough. Like you said, like do you go hard in practice because you also don't want to get anybody hurt in practice. So it is a tough dance to navigate. We've seen some coaches struggle with that as well. Last thing, at least I'll ask you here for initial thought because we're still about a week or so away from the Rose Bowl. I was surprised, I don't know about you are, to see Ohio State as a 2.5-point favorite. I get the last game, they looked impressive as hell, blew out Tennessee, and maybe put to bed any doubts after the Michigan performance. But with that said, I know it was a close game the first time they played in Autzen. Now it's at a neutral site, although, again, I think a lot of Oregon fans will be there, so it should be a majority Duck-heavy crowd.
Mhm.
I was surprised to see Vegas putting the Ducks in an underdog position. I think it's actually going to help them here. A little extra motivation. We know Dan Lanning's like the master motivator, so I'm sure he'll use that to his advantage. Are you surprised to see like the initial line favoring Ohio State by almost a field goal here?
Man, it's a tough call because I truly think this is a toss-up game. And whether it's 1 point one way, 2.5 points another, essentially I think it's a toss-up game on paper. And we'll obviously dive into this a ton on Monday's podcast and preview the games and go into the X's and O's of it. Oregon being undefeated, being a team that beat Ohio State already, albeit at home by 1 point. I think I'm a little bit surprised to see that they're dogs in the game. But Ohio State, right, they're fresh in everybody's mind. What's Vegas trying to do? Where's the money going to be? What's going to move the needle, right? There's a little bit more at play here than just truly who is the best of the teams. But yeah, I'm surprised to see that Oregon's the dogs in the game.
Spread that's I don't think too surprising is the other one here in the Big Ten. Penn State, Boise State. Nittany Lions right now 11-point favorites against the Broncos. What's interesting, Trip, is when you look at the style of play Boise State is going to bring to the Fiesta Bowl, and specifically Ashton Jeanty, right? I would say, like, when you think of like the Big Ten, you think it's like a rough, tough, rugged, right, conference that leans on the run game. And you've seen it up close and personal more than anybody. This style of Jeanty, I feel, is different than anything Penn State has faced in terms of the toughness and just ability to run downhill and run over you. How do you feel about his style versus what Penn State's faced so far this season otherwise?
Well, I feel like James runs very physical for Oregon, and I think Quinshon Judkins is an incredibly powerful, strong runner for Ohio State. So I'm not sure if I'm going to go that far, although I'm very curious to watch him in person. And look, he's an outstanding runner. I think what's unique for Penn State fans and for Big Ten fans, if you haven't watched Boise State a ton, I'm sure you've seen his highlights at least somewhere down the line this year, is how he stands straight up in the backfield before he gets the football, right? He's
Michael Myers
there. It's like a statue, and all of a sudden he gets going. Anyone that's had the year that, and I think any other year he'd be the Heisman Trophy winner. He's not incredibly big. He's like 5'11", 215. So he's not the biggest guy, but he's explosive. And he invites contact. He's a really strong physical runner. And then the first thing people are going to say is, well, who did he do it against? Well, he had 190 plus yards against Oregon. He had 7 yards per carry if you combine the two games against their two top 25 opponents, UNLV and Oregon this year. So he can get it done. Now, you figure that even in this matchup, and not to go too deep into it, like he's going to get his, but can you eliminate the amount of explosive runs he had and has in a game? Because in that Oregon game, he had one really long run. Then for the rest of the game, it was like, okay, he was good, but not great, right? So you can get your stats inflated by 60, 70, 80-yard runs, and that's not to take away from him. But if you can prevent the one home run, or if he gets one, inside, does Boise State have enough offensively to match what Penn State can do? Because I think Penn State can be both a run and pass team with Drew Aller in those elements compared to what they played in at Beaver Stadium last Saturday.
And to your point, Judkins, maybe like I said, is similar, powerful runner, tough. I thought Woody Marks ran tough as well.
Yeah.
The difference, though, for those teams is they all had passing threats, right? Ohio State, USC. Again, we'll dive into this more on Monday. You look at Boise State's offense outside of Jeanty, there's not a lot that scares you. So if you're Tom Allen, you load up the box, you take your chances, you rally to the ball, and you say, look, Madsen, these receivers, beat us.
You have to tackle. Against this guy. He breaks a lot of tackles. And to his credit, he is exceptional at doing that. And I thought Penn State did not tackle well in the Big Ten championship game. I thought they did tackle incredibly well for most of the rest of the season and against SMU. So you have to tackle when he's in space. This is where you have to use your speed, kind of turn him back in. And guys like Kobe King, you'd expect I think he's as sure a tackler as there is in the Big Ten. He's a really important piece against a guy like Ashton Jeanty. But you mentioned those odds, right? Like Oregon's the number 1 seed in this tournament. They have the bye, and they're underdogs in their matchup to go to the national semifinals. And here's Penn State. You're just 7.5, 8.5, 9-point favorites against SMU, took care of business. Now you're an 11-point favorite in your second round game. Like, this brings us back to our whole conversation we were having on Monday, where you can look at the flaws of the field. And to me, it's not which 12 teams got in, but it's how they seeded this. Because right here, this is where a reseed really would benefit a team like an Oregon, and then which teams get buys. Because Notre Dame, Penn State, Texas all have a case for a bye. So then you're looking at Oregon playing a Boise or an Oregon playing an Arizona State and being the heavy favorites in this round. Those lines indicate the flaw of the 12-team field. It's not which teams got into the field. I think this is the only year they'll change it after this year, where the guarantee goes out to the conference champs or the group of 5 team in Boise State's case, that they're going to receive that first round bye. And remember, when they created this whole thing, there was still a Pac-12. So all of a sudden you shift down, you shrink it down to the 2 conferences, the Big Ten and the SEC, and then the ACC, Big 12, group of 5. It's a little bit different landscape than when they drew this thing up and finalized it. So I think that if there is one conversation to still have after this, it's okay, seeding, then also maybe consider reseeding before the second round. Like, I think that, because that really isn't fair that Oregon, to get to the national semifinals, their opponent is Ohio State. And I get that there's beef there, and you do need to examine what's the best way of the 12 to be fair in giving the teams that have earned the opportunity and the bye to get to that next round of the national semis.
Absolutely. And that's the bit, like, I'm not going to get mad at them this year because, again, it's the first year we're kind of seeing it. Like, it sounded good in principle. I love the idea. Like you said, when it was created, there was a 5th Power 5 conference around. No one anticipated the seismic shift in Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC and kind of changing everything.
Yep.
So as long as you're quick to adjust, that's the only thing with all of the NCAA and college sports in general. They're usually slow on the come up here, slow to adjust. As long as, whether it's reseeding, whether it's divvying out how you give out buys, as long as you make an adjustment between now and when the playoff starts next year, all well and good, no harm, no foul. You tried it, you saw it happen, you make adjustments, and you move on. I'm with you. How about this adjustment as well, Trip? What about more home games?
Yeah.
Because you look at it for Oregon, you look at it for Georgia, 2 of the best Boise State, 3 of the best home field advantages in college football. You get a bye, so it's 1 less game. So that, again, is an advantage. But with how electric, how much you saw the home fields impact the first round of games, I would love to see more games on home campuses. I think teams that get a bye absolutely should be able to host 1 game at home. I think if you're Oregon, again, it's great you get a bye, but now it's like you get Ohio State, you don't even get them in your own stadium here for round number 2. I think that's another area where, if you're the playoff committee here, you have to adjust your rules and say, we got to at least give the teams of the bye a home game here as well.
The reason that won't happen is because of the New Year's Six and those bowls and their tie-ins to what was a college football playoff, what it still is now. And I can't imagine them losing the money, right? It's all about money and the history, tradition of the bowls. And I think that's what's standing in the way of it. I agree with you. I think the second round should be on campus sites. We were obviously both there at Beaver Stadium and saw the experience, the atmosphere, the environment that game had. And then all of a sudden you have an Oregon, Ohio State. Even if you don't reseed or change the way you're going to see the tournament, Ohio State going to Oregon, Oregon's not going to be an underdog. They're going to be favored in that game. Usually, I want to say home games, and I'd love to know the math on this. I want to say it's like a 3.5 to even 7.5 points swing based on home versus away or neutral, as Vegas would come up with those odds for those games. So I think Oregon, if they were home against Ohio State, they'd be favored, and that tells you all need to know, right? That right. They deserve that opportunity to play at home. I still believe, and I think ultimately this will be the case once they fix the way the tournament is seeded. I still believe playing less games is the most important thing. So the bye, like you're not going to trade a bye for a home game and have to play an additional game, even though the first 4 games this year were all lopsided. You know, I was reading, Stuart Mandel did a really good column on The Athletic. 21 of the 30 games of the college football playoff at 4 teams were decided by 2 scores or more. 21 of the 30. So it's not like it's a revisionist history that you're talking about on Monday. It's not like all of a sudden blowouts are a new thing. They've happened before. They've happened in championship games. They've happened. I mean, last year, Michigan-Washington really wasn't that competitive of a game. But I love the environment, like college football. And you knew once they hosted games on campus sites with stakes this late in the season, and you get the snow in South Bend, the snow in Happy Valley, Ohio State wearing the all scarlet uniforms and the scarlet out. Nice. Like you knew it was going to you knew that it was going to be very attractive. I think it was a better product to watch on TV too, because you showcase that environment and those fans. And also, like, look, that cuts down on costs. So you're asking so much of fans right now to pick and choose between spending, and there's a 5 to 10% that probably can do it, and they don't have to worry about it. And great, that's wonderful. But for most of your fans who want to experience this wild ride with their team and have a chance to ask them year after year after year. It's one thing for the first season, but to ask it at what point will there be fatigue of, do I go to the home playoff game? Do I go to the Fiesta Bowl? Do I go to the Orange Bowl? Do I go to the national championship? Where am I going to spend my money? How am I going to spend my money on flights over the holidays? All of a sudden you put this in these locales and it becomes a more affordable proposition for families, fans, alumni to be able to attend these games. So I think there's a lot of reasons why it makes sense. But as I said to start the answer, why will it never happen? Because the tie-ins to the bowls and the money involved in the bowls and the history tradition of those bowls, I just don't envision them giving up that right to host in the current contract and model that ESPN's created.
I agree. And unfortunately, you're right. And that's what it comes and that's where, I don't know, if we talk about breakaway, and this is probably a much longer podcast for a different day, but it's if you have a totally different system where you devalue, the Rose Bowl is great. Don't get me wrong. I love the Rose Bowl. But if I'm an Oregon fan, screw the Rose Bowl. Give me this game at home. It's the Bowls suck. I'm sorry. The Bowls suck. In this case, when you rob, like you said, fans of home games, and I think it's a great point too. The cost, and Oregon fans, it's easier. You have, to your point, also one less game, so one less trip to make. But think about it from Penn State and Texas's perspective. Those teams lost conference championship games. If you're a fan that wants to go to Indy or Atlanta, then you want to go to the home game. And now you still have 3 more games to go to, where in this case for Penn State, you're going across the country to play in Arizona New Year's Eve. Then it's at least a little closer, where if you win the next 2, it's Miami in the Orange Bowl and then Atlanta. But it's
for a majority of the fan base, it's still a flight. And the same thing, now with the Big Ten championship, and for the time being, it's going to remain in Indianapolis. You're asking Oregon, USC, Washington fans, that's a flight. And for the most part, Oregon and Washington, those fans all have to fly to wherever they're going next, wherever they're going after that, and wherever they're going after that. And you're asking that of all the northern teams. I think that's where you kind of get lost in this. Texas, if they reach the national semifinals, the game's at AT&T Stadium in Dallas.
Right. No, you're right. It's a lot easier for a lot of these other,
when Georgia, Alabama, Mercedes-Benz is a 3-hour, 4-hour drive for a big group of all of those fan base, Florida State, all these schools, Auburn, the proximity to a lot of these destinations, even Miami, even Orlando, the proximity is really beneficial to these Southern schools and their fan bases. Even to go to New Orleans and go to the Sugar Bowl, it's still doable, where anyone north of the Mason-Dixon line, anyone in the Big Ten country, with the exception of the 2 LA schools, you're flying to every destination and hotels and tickets and over the holidays. It's a lot to ask.
It is. And I think you can water down the home field advantage or the environment, in part because, like you said, not everyone can afford to go every game. And It ruins that. So hopefully we'll see a change at some point.
Talking about paths, and I don't want to go too deep down this road because I think it's another conversation for another day. But how about that, right? Like if Oregon now, they had the rest. Now they play arguably, I think, like Ohio State, because of what happened against Michigan, they're obviously susceptible to a clunker. But I hate to play the hypothetical on paper game because that's the hypothetical on paper game that many are playing.
That's the SEC specialty.
Yeah. But they're in the field, so we can play it, right? It's not like they didn't deserve to get in. They're in, they deserve to be in. And that's the beauty of a 12-team playoff is even though they didn't earn it as often as they may have had to in the past in the regular season, Oregon now gets Ohio State, who I think is one of the top 4 teams in the country. And then Oregon has to go play Texas if Texas beats Arizona State in Dallas. And Oregon, the best team all year. But
And
that is a brutal path.
To add to that, let's say Georgia beats Notre Dame, Georgia beats Penn State, Boise State. All of a sudden now the national championship game is in Atlanta, Oregon, Georgia.
Yeah. But I don't think Georgia's going to win. So that's another
that's fair.
It's true. No,
but
it's a great
if they
point.
do, like to your point, like you're playing 2 out of the 3 games here in essentially enemy territory. It's insane. Like that's the number 1 seed, the only undefeated team in the field. And this is the reward they get. You could argue the most talented team on paper in the field, then 2 road games in the play. It's they did. It is crazy. Like you look at it, like, and it was kind of like half-hearted discussion we had before the Big Ten title game. Is the loser actually better off? And you're looking at it, and it's like you can't argue right now. You'd much rather be Penn State than Oregon. It's crazy.
Yeah. Once you get through that first round game, because I still am adamant playing.
Right.
But once you get through that first round game and you get through it with relative ease and get out of it relatively healthy, it's like, oh, wow. Yeah, what everyone's talked about. Yeah, there's a path there. And that's not to discount Boise State. Like Boise State's a good football team. They've got maybe the best player in the country on their team. But yeah, like there's no question you'd rather be playing an unknown Boise State than Ohio State in this next round. 100%. Outside of the college football playoff, there are other Big Ten games, bowl games. Do we dip our toes into just predictions for these games? I mean, I know a lot of the luster has been lost on this. Still means a lot for some of these programs, but just the amount of opt-outs, it's tough. Bowl season with a 14 playoff, I felt still had a little bit of weight to it. Bowl season now, it's like it's filler. That's all it is.
You know, it's funny. I never thought about it like that until like this year, where you're so locked in on the playoff. I have yet to watch more than a quarter of any bowl game, and I love college football, so I'm all in on these. Like even the crappy bowls, I'm all in on. And so far through this point here, I've not been able to really watch more than, like I said, a quarter and a half. In part just because like it is devalued when you have more than just 2 playoff games to focus on that are always in normal 14 playoff down the road.
And do the teams that lose in that opening round, do they deserve an opportunity to play in a bowl game? Because your season, SMU, Clemson, Tennessee, your season's over.
Right. Yes. I just don't think it matters. Like, not say does like, I just don't. No, I don't think so. I don't think adding an extra game, for what? Like, who's going to play for what?
I think if you just took a real high level approach to it and said, okay, let's have 4 slots open, put those 4 teams in. It makes sense. But then when you start to really dive into it is who's going to play? They just lost like their seasons. They're eliminated. It's over. It makes absolutely no sense to give them that opportunity. There's just how can you go from playing for a championship to being eliminated? But hey, still, here's a trip to Disney for a couple days. I think maybe did they earn it? Did they deserve it? Sure, but when you start to really examine it, interest, who's going to play, moving tickets, getting fans to buy into it, getting the team to buy in. You're already asking them to play a 13, 14 game schedule. So now you're going to have those teams play a 14th or 15th game, a game that absolutely means nothing. I agree. I think those teams, once you're in the playoff, it's kind of the worst part of losing maybe that opening round is you don't get a glamour destination and a bowl trip. But I'd much rather be in a 12-team playoff and not get that than miss the playoff in its entirety.
Same. When you talk about fan travel, like if you're a Tennessee fan, let's just say Tennessee and SMU or Tennessee and Indiana are playing. I mean, if they're playing in, I don't know, Miami on, let's just call it New Year's. Like, I don't know how many fans, let alone players, would care about going to that game. Just
players. That's the big thing. Because when we
yeah.
start picking these games, you start going through who's not playing. It almost feels like that list is as comparable to the list as who is playing in these games.
You're right. And let's try to give you some bowl predictions here. It's always very volatile. We'll start in a calendar order here. So on Thursday, December 26th, right after Christmas, the Rate Bowl out in Phoenix, Rutgers taking on Kansas State. Wildcats, 7-point favorites. To your point, opt-outs. Kyle Monangai, best offensive player, I'd say, for Rutgers. There's no official word yet as we're recording this, but there was video of him at practice in street clothes coaching other running backs. I'm going to assume trip a few days before the bowl game. That means he's not going to play. You look at Greg Schiano. He is a good bowl game coach. He's 6-2 in bowl games here. Touchdown underdog for Rutgers. No Monangai, let's say. Does Rutgers win?
Rutgers, they already had one of their signature wins this year without Monangai. So I think the way they play, I'm going to go Rutgers. You mentioned that 6-2 for Schiano. This is a team that was excited to be in a bowl. And I think ultimately bowl games come down to who's most excited to be there and actually, are they there for the experience or are they there to go out and play? And Greg Schiano's a coach who's not going to be satisfied with going for the experience. They want to go out and play. So I like Rutgers because of their personality, how they got there, and what it meant for them to get there this year. I like Rutgers in this game.
I like your reasoning. I will lean on the logic of more talent. I think Kansas State's the more talented team. Their running back, DJ Giddens, is not going to play, but otherwise, a lot of their key players are still going to play. I'll take the Wildcats. I think they do cover the 7-point spread here. Give me K-State in Phoenix in the Rate Bowl. Let's go to the Friday trip here. Of course, the illustrious SRS Distribution Las Vegas Bowl, USC, A&M Trojans, right? Decimated in the transfer portal. Receivers, running backs, quarterback, gone. A&M, some of their own opt-outs as well. Nick Scorton is their best defensive player, defensive end. He's not going to play, getting ready for the NFL draft. A&M comes in 3.5-point favorites. You talk about wanting to be there. Do you think USC wants to be there?
Here's why I hesitate before just leaping to pick Texas A&M. USC has already played in that stadium this year. It's somewhere they've already had the experience. But they've had so much turmoil with their program, so much noise. You got to go with Texas A&M just based on total maybe it's not the like Texas A&M has some quality that's not going to play, but just the quantity that's not going to play for USC. How do you overcome that as a program? I like Texas A&M.
I'm with you. And two, A&M's a tough team in the trenches. USC, after a hot start, really kind of struggled when they faced downhill running teams that were physical in the offensive, defensive lines. I'm with you. I agree. I think A&M wins here and does cover the 3.5-point spread. All right. My favorite, I don't know about you. This is my favorite bowl sponsor in all of the bowl sponsors. The Bad Boy Mowers. What a hell of a name. Love it. They've sponsored a bunch of bowl games. This year, they're sponsoring the Pinstripe Bowl on Saturday at Yankee Stadium, Nebraska. Speaking of happy to be there, first bowl game for them since 2016. 3.5-point favorites against a Big Ten call him legend in Bill O'Brien. I think that's fair to say with what he did with arriving Penn State. He's leading Boston College. Let's say a coach that's Big Ten fans are familiar with Bill O'Brien. He leads the Eagles into Yankee Stadium here. Who we got, Trip?
This game, sneaky good bowl destination bowl game. New York City, around the holidays, a lot to do, a lot to see. Yeah, you don't get the glamour of the weather, but like when I was in LA for the Rose Bowl 2 years ago, the weather was really average. It was in the 50s, 60s, overcast, a little drizzly, like it's rainy season in the West. New York City, sneaky good bowl game, the Pinstripe Bowl. I like Nebraska.
Same. You talk about wanting to be there. This is going to mean something. This honestly, Trip, reminds me of Penn State back in 2014 when their bowl ban was lifted, and this was the first bowl game they made. It meant a lot to them. It was a great game back and forth. I think this is one of the ones where Nebraska, you saw how happy they were to become bowl eligible. I think they win. I think they cover. I'm with you. I think despite, missing their two leading running backs, with Dowdell transferring and Emmett Johnson out as well, I still think they are good enough and wanting to be there enough to win and beat BC, who's also dealing with some of their own transfer portal issues at the end of the season. All right.
Who is?
That's you know what, you're right. It's more rare if you're not dealing with transfer portal issues than are. That's a good point by you. December 30th, Monday here. So you kind of get set for New Year's Eve, get to the swing of things. Maybe you're off on Monday. It's kind of one of those odd days. Good game here. Iowa, Mizzou in the Trans-Perfect Music City Bowl. This is talk about sneaky good bowl destination. Nashville on the holidays, I'm sure it should be fun. Mizzou 3-point favorite. No Caleb Johnson for Iowa. Obviously also no Cade McNamara as well.
I like Iowa in this game. I do. I think they win this game. They find a way because they have an identity. It doesn't matter who's playing, who's not. I like the Hawkeyes. Quick side note, Missouri, Bo Prabula, Penn State quarterback, transferring to Missouri. I think it's a really good fit for him.
And he, I guess you can say, followed Matt Zollers, who was also a big-time Pennsylvania recruit that Penn State was trying to get, that he ended up going to Mizzou. Those two work out together, so makes sense that two friends now going to Mizzou. Bo will not be playing in this game. Wouldn't be surprising, though, with the transfer portal rules and how it's the Wild West. That all of a sudden you see him on the sideline playing.
That's what happens next year.
This guy switching bowl games. That would be. This is already chaotic. That would make it even 10 times more chaotic.
It would be, and I think you had the comp when we had that long discussion a week or two ago. To have the portal open now with the calendar, it's as if NFL free agency occurred during the NFL playoffs.
Ridiculous. Just absolutely ridiculous. I actually agree with you, though, with Iowa here. I think they muck it up. I think they slow down. Now, Brady Cook will play their quarterback for Mizzou, but I think they, even with Iowa's offensive question marks, losing their running back, I think they make this an ugly game. I think they win. I'm with you. We're on the Hawkeyes. So we're rolling on the Hawkeyes. One of those classic bowl games that probably makes no sense in terms of how they won based on who's playing and who's not. But Kirk Ferentz, we know, finds ways to win these games. New Year's Eve, we will get one playoff game, right? Penn State, Boise State. But the appetizer leading into that, the ReliaQuest Bowl, Michigan, Alabama, two brand names. Spread those big trip. Bama 12.5-point favorites, in large part because Michigan will be playing no Donovan Edwards, no Mason Graham, no Will Johnson, no Colston Loveland. Tough.
Look, right now it feels like Michigan has to hold an opponent to 17, 14 points to even have a chance because they're so one-dimensional on offense. Even without some of their key players, they proved that they could do that in the game against Ohio State. Muck it up, to use your words that you used to talk about Iowa. I just don't see how they can do that against Alabama. Alabama, how about this? Jalen Milroe is playing in this game. Right there alone, even if you don't get the good version of Jalen Milroe, you figure that he's going to be able to make some plays against that Michigan defense. I don't see how they contain Alabama and slow them down to make it that low-scoring type game. Jalen, credit to him, too, to play in this game. Credit to Jalen Milroe. I like Alabama big, especially with their quarterback play.
I agree. I am interested to see how Kalen DeBoer has his guys ready to play. We always know Nick Saban did. Does DeBoer do it in a game where this was a disappointing season for them? But with that said, I'm with you. And I also don't think Kalen DeBoer is going to run the ball 20 times in a row up the middle to try to get yards the way Ohio State did. Even though no Mason Graham, so it'll be a little easier for Alabama. I'm with you. I think Alabama wins here by 2 touchdowns pretty comfortably. Tony the Tiger Sun Bowl, another really good bowl name here, good bowl sponsor. Washington, Louisville. Tyler Shuck, Louisville's quarterback, out. Their best receiver, KC Concepcion, out. Now, we did learn this week, not a surprise trip, Steve Belichick is leaving his post as Washington defensive coordinator to go coach with his dad, Bill, at UNC. Big shock there, I know. No one saw this coming. Washington, can they put a nice little cap here? They struggled on the road. Now, this is a neutral site. Can they finish on a high note here?
I think this is the start of a launching point for Damon Williams Jr. going into next season. I think this is where he now has had time to prepare with bowl practices. I think you see a very good Washington team offensively in this game. Yeah, I like Washington with their young quarterback making a big impact and kind of setting the stage for next season.
That, and I like Washington's pass defense. Even again, with Steve Belichick leaving, I think they play well and limit Louisville's offense. I'm with you. Give me Washington here. They are Tony the Tiger Sun Bowl champs. I don't know if you're going to have Jed Fish get Frosted Flakes dumped on him. We saw NIU's head coach get fries dumped on him for winning the Idaho Potato Bowl. I hope he gets some Frosted Flakes. I think that'd be a nice little touch. But, hey, we'll see what happens here. let's go to the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl. This is, I think, this is to me one of the most interesting bowl games from the Big Ten's perspective here, Trip. Illinois, South Carolina, two teams that you could argue, with their schedules here, are playing some of the best football down the stretch. You're going to have, outside of Kyle Kennard, their all-world defensive end for South Carolina, and Pat Bryant, pretty solid, right, good receiver for Illinois. Most players on each side will play here. South Carolina comes in 9-point favorite. How do you feel about Illinois going in this one?
Man, I really want to pick Illinois in this game. I think Brett Bielema's team was underrated all year. I think they made a lot of big plays, took a lot of steps in the right direction, but I think South Carolina is too athletic and too talented for them in this game. South Carolina, second half of the year, was as good as any team in the SEC. As good as any team in the SEC. I think South Carolina wins this game.
I think Illinois wins. I think in part because I think that break will kind of maybe slow down some momentum. Not that I don't know how much I actually believe they were going to make the playoff, but they tried to pound the table like they were going to. So what's the letdown factor like when you're not in the playoff at 9-3? I think Illinois' defense can do a good job of containing, not slowing down or stopping, but at least containing Lenore Sellers, make him more one-dimensional. I think you could see a big game here from Luke Altmaier. Give me Illinois. Give me Brett Bielema.
Well, we talked about Missouri adding a Big Ten backup quarterback. How about South Carolina? Ohio State's Aaron Nolan transferring to South Carolina to be their quarterback.
Not bad. That's the one downside here for Ohio State, getting all these talented players. High recruiting Aaron Nolan. Great name, by the way. Aaron Nolan. Oh, my God. You can't suck at that.
That's the name for a quarterback. Great name.
Absolutely. Good step by you then. And look, I would love to see Brett Bielema doused in Cheez-Its. I think that would be a fitting way to end a 10-win season for Illinois. Last one here, Trip. This is, I think, how do I phrase this? The most disgusting bowl. I would not want to win this game. I'm not kidding. If I was the head coach, I would not want to win this game. It is, of course, the Duke's Mayo Bowl. Minnesota, 6.5-point favorites taking on Virginia Tech. If you don't know, now you will. The winning coach doused in mayo. No, thank you, Trip. If I'm PJ Fleck, I'm throwing this game. No, thank you.
Yeah, but I like them. I think they're going to win.
And if there's a coach that would is practicing for and living for having mayo dumped on him, is not PJ Fleck. Maybe Brett Bielema, I could see enjoying it, having a sandwich out there in his hand. So when the mayo is dumped on him, it's it hits on the sandwich, he can eat it. Outside of Brett Bielema, I don't think there's another coach in the Big Ten that is more fitting of a mayo bath. I think he's into it. Here. We'll leave the jokes out there for you to make it home. All I'll say is give me Minnesota, giving them -6.5.
We mentioned some transfer portal news there, and we'll do this to wrap it up. And I think it fluctuates by the minute. So by the time we're done recording this, there will probably be more announcements. But instead of trying to dive into every team, every program, there's two programs I want to spotlight really quick. We've all talked about the success that Oregon's had so far, and they're cleaning it up in the portal as Phil Knight backs the Brinks truck up right to the front door of all these prospects. But how about when you look at Oregon and then you look at Ohio State and then you look at it in comparison? Remember, these are teams in the same league. The disparity of the league between the who's and the who's nots, right? Ohio State got Max Clark, Purdue tight end. Ohio State got a Rice offensive tackle, running back C.J. Donaldson from West Virginia, other big pickups. But then Oregon gets the safety, Dylan Thieneman from Purdue. And then Oregon also gets Johnson, the cornerback from Northwestern. Purdue also lost their defensive end, Will Helt, to Clemson. So they lost their three best players in the portal. But Purdue, two of their best players transferred in conference. Best defensive player to Oregon, best offensive player to Ohio State. I mean, talk about the who's and the who's not right now in the portal. And even in your own conference, players are going to other schools. It used to be a no-no. Remember when you first started to be able to transfer? It was, but we're going to block everyone from our own conference.
Yep.
Not anymore.
No, not anymore. And now
it just widens the gap between the who's got it and who doesn't. And to me, that Yeah, there's a lot of takeaways, and Ohio State gets a much-needed offensive tackle. I saw Donaldson this year, running back, West Virginia. I don't think he's as healthy as he was when he first stepped on campus. He was great as a freshman. He's kind of that bruiser now. Lost some of his explosion because he's battled injuries during his career. It'll be interesting to see what he does there. But a big get as one of the top offensive tackles they could get from Rice. But really, bigger picture, it's Ohio State can get who they want. Oregon can get who they want. And then you got Purdue, who's losing players, their best players, to their own teams in their own conference. Like that's where we live right now in college football.
We do. And it's hard to put a silver lining on it. But I'm an optimistic guy, so I'm going to try to hear if you're a Purdue fan, and that's this. Look across town. Look at what Kirk Cignetti did, where he was able to come in and win with his own players, win with lesser talented players, take an Indiana team to the playoff that nowhere near had the amount of talent that Ohio State, Oregon had. Barry Odom had success at UNLV. I mean, they were one game away from being in the playoff themselves. And UNLV's roster, again, look at the talent versus everywhere else. Like, he is a guy that I think is a developer, can maybe turn those 2 stars into playing like 4. The key is going to be now going forward, right? Can you keep them? And right now it's easier to leave, right? If you're some of the Purdue's best players, you got a coaching change. Other programs are looking for you. Like, it makes all the sense in the world why you would leave. But if you're Barry Odom, you get things going, it could be a little easier to maybe keep some of those guys going forward as well. Speaking of Indiana trip, they got a quarterback. How about that? We know who Curtis Rourke's heir apparent is. Fernando Mendoza of Cal, coming on in for could be 2 years of eligibility. They know how their heir apparent new quarterback.
Yeah, and he was ranked number 4 in the Athletics quarterback transfer portal rankings. Georgia was really attracted to him. And look at the start of the year Cal had out on the West Coast and joining the ACC for the first time. And he had a really good year for them. 69% completion percentage, 3,000 yards. He's mobile. He's a little bit more mobile than Curtis Rourke. I think that adds a little bit more to their offense and exactly what Shanahan wants to do with Cignetti there in Bloomington. But this is a big get for them. That's a big time quarterback, and it answers a big question for next season. Who's going to be the starter? And as he comes in, the backup Jackson from Indiana enters the portal as well. But that's a big get.
But to your point, also, like, I think that's why if you're Purdue and maybe other fans in the Big Ten in the kind of the same area, look at the team you just listed. They were able to get Mendoza from Cal, and they outbid, I'm probably sure, and won a battle against Georgia. Like, it's not always going to be where the best talent goes to the best schools. Good for Indiana, good for Cignetti selling his future and his vision. And at least now for Cal, or for Indiana, you have some stability and an answer.
Do you know your geography of the Hoosier State?
I don't know. I guess you're going to quiz me.
Where's Purdue located? In
West
Indiana?
Lafayette.
Yeah, but where is West Lafayette? Like proximity in the state.
Oh, I have no idea. I mean,
where is Indiana located?
Bloomington. I'm going to say
you said
West
cross town. How far apart do you feel like they are?
Rough guess, half hour. How far?
Purdue is an hour and a half north of Indianapolis, and Bloomington is at least an hour south of Indianapolis. So they are not exactly cross town.
Oh, I assume they both were north.
No.
So this is why we have you on the pod. You're here to checks and balances. Look, if you want me to name all the 50 states capitals, I can get probably 35 of the 50. How useful is that? Probably
Montana.
Not. Helena.
Okay.
Oh, but like, how useful is that? Probably not. So my apologies to everyone in the Hoosier State. No disrespect. My geography just sucks. It sucks. What can I say? So, okay, not cross town, interstate, intrastate. We did this. Intrastate.
Great Polar Express version of the podcast today.
Agreed. A nice holiday edition. Sans Santa, sans everyone else. This old trip but you all look like you were sitting in Santa's couch. Like if Santa on December 26th is kicking up, I feel like that's the exact seat he'd be sitting in.
Chase is here. I was just going to put him on the podcast as well this week.
Oh, very cute. Is he named after Jamar Chase or Chase Daniel?
Do you really want the answer to that question?
Don't you dare. I know who it is. No, I do not. Don't ruin my Christmas, please. On that note,
podcast.
Yes, it was. Thank you for joining us here on what has been a weird week. We'll be back on Monday, break down everything for the 2 playoff games here, Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, Boise State as well. Enjoy the holidays. Please enjoy them. We'll talk to you Monday right here on the podcast.